Sweetness. It is the first taste we experience when we are born. It is a reward for good children, and it is also the perfect tool to hide the darkest secrets. Houston, Texas, the 1970s. We often teach our children, don't take candy from strangers. But the greatest tragedy didn't come from a stranger. It came from the man you called the nice neighbor. Welcome to Strange Frequency. Today we reopen the file on the case that forever changed America's innocence. August 8, 1973. The Pasadena Police Department in Texas received an emergency call. Address: 2020 Lamar Drive. Initial report: a shooting due to a domestic dispute. But upon entering the house, the officers realized this was no ordinary argument. The man under the white sheet was Dean Corll, 33 years old. He was a respected electrician in the area. Dean Corll died from multiple gunshot wounds. But the strange thing is, inside his house were many toys, candy, and tools that shouldn't appear in a normal home. The person who pulled the trigger didn't run. He sat there waiting for the police. His name was Elmer Wayne Henley, 17 years old. Elmer told the police in a panic, "He was going to kill me. I had no other choice." The officer asked, "Why would a kind man like Dean Corll want to kill you?" Elmer looked up, his eyes heavy with a terrible secret. His answer sent chills down the officer's spine. "I'm not the only one," Elmer whispered. "Do you want to know where the other kids are?" Elmer led the police to a rented boat shed in Southwest Houston. He said that Dean Corll had buried his secrets here. Skeptical, the police brought shovels and flashlights inside. First shovel strike, then the second. They didn't find gold or drugs. What they found was an old sneaker. That shoe belonged to a boy who went missing 2 years ago. And beneath that shoe lay the naked truth about the Candy Man. That night, Dean Corll died, but Houston's nightmare had only just begun. If you could travel back to 1970 and ask anyone in the Heights neighborhood about Dean Corll, you'd get the same answer. Dean? He's the nicest guy in the neighborhood. He wasn't a recluse living in the shadows. He lived right in the light. 31 years old, Air Force veteran, skilled electrician. Dean Corll was the kind of neighbor everyone wanted. Broken porch light? Dean fixed it for free. Need a ride? Dean was always willing. He built a cover so perfect, it didn't have a single scratch. But there was one thing the neighbors didn't know. Real-life monsters don't have fangs or claws. Their deadliest weapon is unconditional kindness. Dean's family owned a candy factory called Pecan Prince. Because of this, his pockets were always full of sweets. He handed out free candy to every child he met on the street, and thus the name the Candy Man was born. It sounds sweet, but to Dean, candy wasn't a gift. It was bait. Just like a fisherman scattering chum, Dean used candy to attract attention, to get the kids to crowd around him, so he could observe, and so he could choose. When a child accepts candy, they unknowingly enter into a psychological debt. Dean is so nice to me, I have to listen to him. That was the first brick in the wall of manipulation. Dean's deadliest weapon wasn't a gun, it was this white van. He had customized it into a mobile, secret base. Thick carpet on the floor, curtains drawn tight, pillows and comic books. To kids wandering under the scorching Texas sun, this van was an oasis. It represented freedom. It was a place where parents and the law couldn't see. Hop in, I'll take you for a ride. But once that door closed, paradise became a prison. The cozy cocoon became a perfect soundproof box. Behind the Candyman mask was a rotting soul. Dean knew he couldn't maintain this cover forever if he acted alone. He needed help. He needed someone who could enter the children's world without raising suspicion. And he found David Brooks, a dropout, lacking money and craving validation. David was the exact piece Dean was looking for. That fateful meeting marked the beginning of a tragedy. Dean didn't use force to take David. He used money, gifts, and attention. He began to buy the boy's soul piece by piece. David Brooks was a school dropout from a struggling family. To David, Dean Corll wasn't just a neighbor. Dean was a benefactor. Dean gave David pocket money, bought him new clothes, and gave him rides whenever he wanted. But the peak of this bribery was when Dean bought David a car. For a teenager in the 70s, owning a car meant owning the world. David felt he owed Dean everything, and Dean knew exactly when to collect on that debt. But David Brooks was quite quiet and had few friends. Dean needed someone with more influence. And so, David introduced Elmer Wayne Henley. Elmer was different from David. He was handsome, smooth-talking, and the center of attention at every neighborhood gathering. Dean realized immediately this was the Pied Piper he needed. Where Elmer went, the kids would follow. If Elmer said Dean is cool, the whole neighborhood would believe Dean was truly cool. Dean began shifting his investment towards Elmer. A cruel alliance was formed. Dean proposed a simple deal. He would pay for every friend David and Elmer brought to him. What was the price of a friend? $5? $10? Or just a free joyride? Initially, Elmer and David might have deceived themselves. They thought, Dean probably just wants someone to run errands. Or Dean just likes hanging out. They took the money, and once they took the money, they became accomplices. This is what makes the Dean Corll case so haunting. The victims weren't kidnapped by masked strangers. They stepped into the death car because the person inviting them was their best friend. Get in. Elmer invited us. It's definitely going to be fun. Trust is the most effective murder weapon. Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks sold out their friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances. They turned friendship into a commodity, and Dean Corll's killing machine began running at full capacity. Their modus operandi always began with an irresistible invitation. Come over to Dean's. He's got great music, free drinks, and no parents around to nag you. For bored teenagers looking for adventure, it was an offer they couldn't refuse. They arrived. The house sat quietly in a residential neighborhood. No one knew that the neighbors were used to seeing this van dropping off kids late at night. They simply thought it was just another youth gathering. The party begins. Alcohol and the stifling atmosphere quickly caused the victims to let their guard down. Dean Corll was an expert at creating an environment that made the kids feel lightheaded and disoriented. He wanted to disable their ability to think logically. While the victims were lost in the fun, Elmer and David remained sober and alert. They knew the script. They sat there, watching, waiting for Dean's nod. The air in the room began to grow heavier, and then Dean introduced the game of the night. He brought out a board with handcuffs attached. He said, "This is a magic prop I just bought. I bet none of you are strong enough to escape from this." Appealing to the ego and bravado of adolescence was a highly effective psychological tactic. Are you scared? Give it a try. I'll give you 5 minutes to break the lock. The victim stepped forward, believing it was just a harmless joke among men. The moment that dry metallic sound rang out was the moment the smile vanished from Dean Corll's lips. The game was over. No more music, no more laughter. The victim realized he couldn't pull his hands out. And looking up, he saw the kind uncle from moments ago was gone. In front of him stood the real Candyman, and the party was just officially beginning on his terms. Why did no one hear the cries for help? That is the most haunting question of this case. The answer lies within this speaker cabinet. Whenever the real fun began, Dean Corll would crank the volume knob up to the maximum. The surrounding neighbors thought it was just kids partying all night. They complained about the noise, but they never imagined that ear-splitting rock music was being used to swallow up desperate screams. In that room, time seemed to stand still. The victims were stripped of all power. Dean Corll didn't just want to kill them. He wanted to possess them. He wanted to see absolute fear in the eyes of the children who had once trusted him. These children were no longer guests. They had become part of the Candyman's collection. And Dean's rule was simple. Once you step into this room, no one is allowed to walk out alive. What about Elmer and David? Why didn't they run? Why didn't they call the police? The answer lies in a psychological phenomenon known as trauma bonding. They were both accomplices and victims of manipulation. Dean Corll bound them with fear and complicity. You brought him here. If I get caught, you will rot in prison too. That threat turned these two teenagers into silent puppets, continuing to serve their master. Dean Corll had a brutal trick to derail any investigation. He forced his victims to make one final call home, a scripted scenario, a painful lie. I'm working out of town. I'm okay. Don't look for me. Those were the last words parents ever heard from their children. They thought their sons had run away, a common trend at the time. They didn't know that their son was calling from just a few blocks away, inside Dean Corll's death chamber. The call ends, hope is extinguished, and the victim's fate is sealed. While horrific crimes were taking place on Lamar Drive at the Houston police station, Another tragedy was unfolding. The tragedy of indifference. Mothers kept coming to report crimes. "My son has been missing for 3 days. He didn't come home for dinner." But the answer they received was always the same. "The boy is 15, long hair. He probably ran away with some hippie friends. He'll come back when he runs out of money." Police at the time held a deadly prejudice. Every missing teenager was a voluntary runaway. We have to look at the context of 1970. It was the era of hippie culture, of rebellion. Children running away to California to find freedom was business as usual. This cultural wave created a perfect smokescreen for Dean Corll. He knew that if he abducted a well-behaved child on their way home from school, the whole city would scour the streets. But if he took a boy hitchhiking on the roadside, no one cared. He chose victims based on their invisibility to society. And remember the forced calls from before. "Mom, I'm going away for work." Those calls were the fatal blow. They planted a false hope in parents' hearts. They believed their children were still alive. They believed their children were happy somewhere. They stopped searching. They didn't know that the moment they hung up the phone, their child was no longer of this world. The most terrifying thing is the distance. Most victims lived in the same neighborhood. They went to the same school, played on the same ball field, and they disappeared in the same way. The Heights became the Bermuda Triangle for these children. But every secret has its breaking point. Dean Corll was too confident. He thought he was God, holding the power of life and death. He didn't expect that the collapse of this criminal empire would come from the very masterpiece he painstakingly molded. Elmer Wayne Henley. The night of August 8, 1973. Elmer Wayne Henley makes a fatal mistake. He brings along 2 male friends and a girl named Rhonda. Elmer had forgotten Dean Corll's most important rule: never bring a woman to the lair. Dean Corll was an extreme misogynist. Rhonda's presence shattered his perfect world. He allowed everyone inside, but the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It turned cold and thick with the scent of danger. Dean tied up Elmer's friends. He was furious. He gave Elmer a brutal ultimatum. "You have to choose. Either you help me kill them, or I will kill everyone, including you and the girl." This was the ultimate loyalty test. Dean thought Elmer was still the obedient sheep he had groomed for 2 years. He believed fear would make Elmer obey, but Dean was wrong. In that life or death moment, a thought flashed through Elmer's mind. Today it's them. Tomorrow it will be me. He realized he wasn't Dean's partner. He was just a disposable toy nearing its expiration date. Dean screamed, "You wouldn't dare! I made you!" But the monster Dean created now had claws of its own. 6 shots, no hesitation. Elmer Wayne Henley emptied the clip into the man he once looked up to as a father figure. Silence engulfed the house at 2020 Lamar Street. Dean Corll, the deadly Candyman, was dead. Elmer didn't run. He picked up the phone and called the police. "I just killed a man." The nightmare was over, but the horrifying truth was only just beginning to be exposed. Elmer Wayne Henley's confession led police to a specific location, a rented boat shed on Silver Bell Street. Elmer said, "I don't remember exactly how many, but they are all there." Police broke the lock. The smell of mold and lime wafted out. Dean Corll didn't rent this shed to store a boat. He rented it to serve as his private graveyard. As the first shovelfuls of earth were removed, the terrible truth began to surface. Police realized with horror, this was not a single grave. It was a mass grave. Bodies were stacked on top of one another, covered with a layer of lime, then another layer of bodies. Dean Corll had utilized every inch of dirt in this cramped shed. 1 body and a 5 body, then 10. The final count at this shed was 17. 17 boys had lain beneath the feet of Houston residents for years without anyone knowing. They were not just numbers in a forensic report. They were someone's son, someone's brother, someone's friend. These glasses belonged to a boy who loved to read. This watch was a birthday gift from a father. All their dreams, their futures, stopped at age 15 or 16. Dean Corll didn't just steal their lives, he stole their identities. Identifying the victims in 1973 was a forensic nightmare that would last for decades. But the shed wasn't everything. When the shed ran out of space, Dean and his accomplices took bodies to High Island Beach. Here, more remains were found buried beneath the sand. In total, police recovered 28 bodies. It was the largest serial murder case in American history at that time. And the most painful question for the living remained: who will pay the price for this crime now that the mastermind is dead? 1974. The trial for the most shocking serial murder case in Houston's history begins. But there is a major problem. The mastermind, Dean Corll, is not there. The chair of the true monster sits empty. In total, police recovered 28 bodies. It was the largest serial murder case in American history at that time. And the most painful question for the living remained: who will pay the price for this crime now that the mastermind is dead? All the public's rage is directed at two teenagers, Elmer Wayne Henley, 18, and David Brooks, 19. The question for the jury is not, did they do it? It is, did they do it because they were forced or because they wanted to? The defense paints a sympathetic picture. They argue that Elmer and David were victims too. They lived in constant fear. If I didn't follow Dean's orders, I would be the next one in the boat shed. It was the logic of survival. Elmer weeps before the court. He tells of how Dean manipulated his mind, how he threatened his family. For a moment, the public seems to waver. Can we forgive the puppet when the puppeteer is already dead? But the prosecutor doesn't buy the tears. He presents the cold, hard evidence. Fear? Then why did you take the money? Why did you drive the car he bought you? Why did you leave and then voluntarily return? They weren't in chains. They had countless opportunities to call the police, but they chose silence. They chose to sell out their friends in exchange for cars and nice clothes. That isn't fear. That is complicity. The final judgment is handed down. There is no leniency. David Brooks receives a life sentence. He died in prison in 2020 from COVID-19. Elmer Wayne Henley received 6 consecutive 99-year sentences, a total of 594 years. Elmer Wayne Henley is still alive today, serving his time in Texas. He has applied for parole multiple times but has always been denied. Justice has been served, but it cannot bring 28 children back. And for the families, the pain is a life sentence without parole. The Dean Corll case, along with subsequent cases like John Wayne Gacy, marked the end of the age of innocence. Hitchhiking culture collapsed. Parents began teaching their children a new lesson for survival: stranger danger. The image of the kind neighbor was shattered. Society realized that evil doesn't necessarily hide in the shadows. He could be the candy man, the electrician, or the one organizing parties for the neighborhood. Dean Corll died over 50 years ago, but the candy man still exists. He has simply changed his form. Today, he doesn't need a white van. He doesn't need to stand on a street corner handing out sweets. The van is now a direct message, DM. The sweet candy is now game cards, online praise, and fake empathy on social media. The grooming process remains exactly the same. Build trust, isolate from family, and then abuse. We are not making this video to glorify the killer. We are here to remember 28 stolen lives. They were boys with dreams, families, and futures. They were forgotten by the system, but we will not forget them. Let their story serve as a reminder that family attention and parental listening are the strongest shields protecting children from any monster. The devil doesn't have horns. Sometimes the devil smiles and hands you a piece of sweet candy. Never take it. And more importantly, teach your children how to say no. Thank you for joining Strange Frequency on this journey into darkness. If you found this video valuable, please like and subscribe. I am Strange Frequency. Good night, and remember to lock your door.